What's going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants videos. We continue to sit and wait on the Adoree Jackson watch as he stayed in New York yesterday. Had a meeting with Logan Ryan. I'll talk more about that if and when the signing becomes official and the New York Giants are able to add their second cornerback. But as of now, he is not a New York Giant, but I will definitely have a video up on that tonight if, in fact, it does happen. And a lot of you guys have requested I go live again. I'm going to wait to see if that becomes official, but if the New York Giants do make that signing at some point today, I will be live tonight to recap it with you guys and talk about the future of this football team. I'll also have a separate video out, if I have time permitting today, talking about now after free agency, some of the needs that the New York Giants have going into the draft, and kind of just recapping all the signings that the Giants made in free agency, and it still may not be done. You still may be able to get guys on bargain contracts down the line. But I would think at this point in time, if they were able to bring in Adoree Jackson, he would be the last big name signing for the New York Giants. But hey, you never know. And in this video, I'm going to jump into a couple of things regarding the New York Giants. Kyle Rudolph, and I got a ton of quotes off GiantsWire.com regarding signing with the New York Giants, talked about Joe Judge and why he was such a huge factor into why he chose playing for this football team. And I thought a lot of the quotes kind of popped off the page, and I loved hearing some of the things that Rudolph had to say about the culture that the New York Giants are building here. I also wanted to touch on some of the things that Dominique Foxworth had to say regarding the signing of Kenny Golladay. And to no surprise of many, the mainstream media continues to pick on us, and get used to it. We've seen it with Joe Judge all along. I go back to last year with Joe Judge. I heard several people, whether it was the New York media, whether it was the broad media, people like ESPN, when Judge first took this job, when they started to hear the things about the tennis balls and about how he wanted to, have these, strenuous practices to try to get this team tough, I heard several people say that's going to scare players away. Players aren't going to want to come here. Well, now you're starting to hear the opposite. You're starting to see players that actually want to come in and play for this head coach because they like what he's building here with the New York Giants. And Dominique Foxworth, no different here. Not talking about Joe Judge, but talking about how the Kenny Golladay move is overrated. And don't get me wrong, I am completely willing to listen to people's opinions that think it could be an overrated signing, due in large part to the fact that he's injury prone, due in large part to the fact that maybe they feel like the offensive line's a bigger need, and that's kind of what he said. But his other reasoning in the quote, I completely disagree with. Listen, I'm a big offensive line guy, but I'm the first to tell you, we needed weaponry on this team, and I'll dive further into some statistics from last year's football team as to why it is clearly obvious that the New York Giants need a number one wide receiver. And by getting Golladay, in my opinion, a guy who I think fits this scheme very well, it's going to make guys like Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard's jobs a lot easier. But we'll talk about Foxworth. We'll talk about what he had to say out of ESPN. But the first thing we're going to touch on is some of the quotes that came out from Kyle Rudolph. Got these off GiantsWire.com. This being the first quote, and kind of him just talking about what he's going to bring to the table for the New York Giants. Giants fans are going to get someone that can help Saquon Barkley and that can help in the run game and that can also help protect Daniel Jones in certain situations. So there he's talking about his blocking, his pass blocking, his run blocking, maybe used in an H-back role, kind of like what we did with Red Ellison when we first brought him along. And he's talking about how that's the strength of his game, and that's probably one of the major reasons why the New York Giants brought him in. I also think he fits the scheme very well, and I also think he's going to definitely help us in the red zone, which he later went on to talk about. Rudolph added via NJ Advanced Media, but you're also going to get someone who I always try to be extremely reliable in the pass game. And I'm going to get further into details about how many drops the New York Giants had last year, but they got 11 from Evan Ingram, and I think he dropped about 10% of his targets last year. Rudolph, to put that in context, I believe only has one drop over his last 2 years combined, albeit not as many targets, but still, he's much more sure-handed than a guy like Evan Ingram, which is what the New York Giants need at that position. When my number is called, when the quarterback has the trust in me to throw the football, I'm going to execute and make sure I catch the ball. Whether that be moving the chains on third down, a big play on first down, or scoring touchdowns in the red zone. That's what I prided myself on for the last 10 years to be able to bring to an offense. And it sounds like exactly what the New York Giants need on that side of the football. There's so many times you think back to last year where we couldn't execute on third down, but specifically in the red zone. The red zone offense last year was a mess. Of course, Barkley had something to do with that, but the lack of weaponry, the lack of taller threats, the lack of, people actually catching the football, definitely attributed to it. So getting a sure-handed tight end goes a long way. The same can be said for Kenny Golladay. Next thing I want to pull up is what he had to say about Joe Judge and why he was a major factor with some of the things that he said, why Rudolph ultimately targeted the New York Giants as a destination. Reading these quotes gives me goosebumps. Love to hear this out of the mouth of Kyle Rudolph. One of the lines he said that really resonated with me was, overachievers aren't okay with mediocrity. I want to surround myself with a bunch of overachievers, Judge said to Kyle Rudolph. And what does that remind you of? Because I'll tell you who it reminds me of. That's the New England Patriots. The New England Patriots are a franchise historically that has gotten more than what is expected out of their players. Tom Brady is the poster child for overachievers. But you could go down a laundry list of players at every position on that football team. Wes Welker comes to mind. Danny Woodhead comes to mind. Several players on the defense come to mind that had very limited expectations, and they came there, via free agency or via the draft. And the Patriots found what those guys were good at. They found overachievers, guys that were looking to work hard. They instilled their culture, and they came here and got the job done. And that seems to be what Joe Judge is trying to mimic. I've always looked at myself as someone that tries to work harder than the next guy and be an overachiever, and that really resonated with me, and that's something I want to be a part of. And Golladay didn't go into as much detail as he did, but he also went on to say that he loved some of the things that Joe Judge had to say. Then later he goes on to say, Judge said, listen, we're all about football, and we're going to work hard, and we're going to do things the hard way. We're going to build things the right way so it lasts, and that's something I want to be a part of. How do you not love hearing that? And, I've talked about that many times as well. I'm not about the short-term fix. I'm about doing things the right way in terms of building a football team, free agency, draft, everything else. And that's kind of what Kyle Rudolph is saying there. The Giants are trying to be competitive for a long period of time, kind of like the New England Patriots. Not to say we're ever going to reach those levels. That is unheard of. That will probably never be matched again. But the Giants are trying to build a team that is going to be in the thick of it year in and year out. And you got to love what you're hearing right there off the mouth of Joe Judge. Then, I wanted to pull up something here about Kenny Golladay from Dominic Foxworth, who works for ESPN, and kind of being critical about the move by the New York Giants. This is what he had to say. I got this off Giants Cove on Instagram, but it was on Twitter where somebody pointed me to it. I think it's an overrated move. This is not what the Giants needed. Not what the Giants needed? We'll talk more about that in a second. They needed help on their O-line, and I agree with that. They also definitely need help on the O-line. They have playmakers at receiver, tight end, and running back. I don't think he'll be that impactful. We have playmakers at tight end, at wide receiver. Running back, I agree, if Saquon Barkley is healthy. Evan Ingram had 11 drops last year. Evan Ingram was a joke of a Pro Bowler. I think we all agree with that. I think he was very underwhelming last year. A lot of people thought he would break onto the scene, and we definitely needed more playmakers. So the notion that we didn't need another playmaker is ridiculous. We definitely need to bolster up that offensive line, and I'm starting to become more and more in favor of drafting an offensive lineman in the first round. But to really hit home with how ridiculous this sounds coming off the mouth of Dominic Foxworth of ESPN, all you got to do is go back and look at last year's offense. Last year, the New York Giants only had 36 plays of 20-plus yards or more through the air, which is on average 2 plays a game, or a little bit, 2.25 plays a game. That ranks near bottom of the league. Last year, they only had 5 plays with over 40 yards or more. And yeah, sure, some of that definitely goes back to the offensive line, but the New York Giants were clearly a limited offense. And in terms of execution, you look at the drops. Last year, the Giants had the 7th most drops in the sport, despite only having the 26th most passing attempts. So to make it seem like we didn't need an upgrade at the playmaker position, and that it's an overrated move, makes no sense to me. I think Kenny Golladay, now you could say that we overpaid. That's fair. But Kenny Golladay was definitely a guy that was needed on this football team, and a guy that really fits the scheme. Now, by no means am I saying that the offense is a finished product. Right now, in my opinion, the biggest need for this team is to absolutely upgrade that offensive line. But you look at this offense in their totality last year, Daniel Jones was sacked the fourth most times in football. That's where I agree that we definitely need to beef up that offensive line. And if you add McCoy, I'd be willing to bet that we probably were the most sacked team in football, if not the most right there. We struggled mightily in the first half of the season, got better over the second half, but it's still a major problem. But in terms of the yards, we were 29th in yards, 31st in passing touchdowns. We were 31st in red zone efficiency. Adding a guy like Golladay, that's what he's known for. The guy led the league in touchdowns 2 years ago. That's what Kyle Rudolph is known for. If you don't score in the red zone, you lose football games. So adding these two guys to the offense will certainly help in that aspect. So to say that it was you could say it was an overrated move in the sense that maybe you feel like we overpaid, or maybe you felt like we should have paid a little bit more attention to the offensive line. But to say that we already had playmakers in place couldn't be further from the truth. Our lack of weaponry was a major reason why this offense wasn't able to put up more points. Of course, Saquon Barkley going down definitely added to that, but even with Barkley, we all know that we didn't have a number one wide receiver, and by adding a guy like Kenny Golladay, who was a bona fide number one, it puts everybody else in their place. Suddenly, Slayton is not going up against number one corners, and he could thrive in that number two position. Suddenly you're not asking Shepard to do too much. He's now the third or possibly even fourth option in the pass game in the slot. And on top of that, they added John Ross. We absolutely needed to address playmakers, and by him saying that, it just leads me to believe that the guy doesn't watch football games of the New York Giants. Again, I completely agree with him on the offensive line, and that's where I'm focusing my attention now. But to say we didn't need Kenny Golladay couldn't be further from the truth. I would say we were one of the top teams that needed a number one wide receiver, and now it's going to give Daniel Jones the weapons he needs to succeed. Now we got to make sure we can block. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.